Okay, this week we're talking about Zechariah chapter 5, but before we do that, I wanted us to look back, not just at the last chapter, but I want us to remember where we've been. So I gave you guys a few questions to think about in advance. Going back to Zechariah 1, what was God's opening word to his people?
Return to me.
Okay, return to me. And if they did that, what would he do?
Turn to them.
Return to them. Okay, great. And so we see that as sort of the setup for what's to come, right? So it's important that we know what all he said. Anybody have anything else from chapter 1 that they would say is a part of his opening message? That's fine if not, just wondering if somebody had something else.
Well, it goes on to say, return now from your evil ways and your evil deeds.
Okay, so we talked about them having to repent from something, right?
Yeah.
Good. What does the picture of him returning to them actually look like? He gave more information in verses like 16 and 17, I think. What's it mean that he's going to return to them?
He's going to dwell with them.
He's going to dwell with them. And so this is also part of the setup. And so moving on from there, what are the people involved in at this time that Zechariah is prophesying them to them? What work are they involved in?
Those who have come back are building their own homes. They're fixing their own, trying to repair their own lives and their own homes.
Okay, but they have also started what?
Rebuilding the temple.
Oh, sorry, you guys, just a minute. I had a log jump out of the fire. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
It's okay. Okay, so yes, they've been building their own homes, but what else have they started to do?
To lay the foundation for the temple.
Okay, so they had started that work, and we've talked about that whole process throughout all of our cross references. So that then has been, if you would look back at all 4 chapters that we already discussed, including the visions, in some way, shape, or form, you could tie that back to this focus of building his temple, right? Can you guys kind of picture that in your minds? Sometimes involving people who are going to do it. So what 2 people did we focus on the last 2 weeks? You guys remember?
Joshua and Zechariah.
Yeah, there's another Z.
Zerubbabel.
Zerubbabel. I know. I find
my.
myself like saying the wrong ones. Okay, good. So that pretty much brings us up to chapter 4. So what would you say was your chapter theme? What was chapter 4 about?
I had my spirit will finish the temple.
Okay, good. Whose spirit is my?
God's spirit.
Okay, God's spirit. Anybody else? Y'all have something similar to that?
Yeah, by my spirit, not of your own strength.
Okay, so Zerubbabel gets this word that he laid the foundation and he will finish it. And it'll be through God's spirit and not through any might or power of their own. And as we talked about it, also not by any of the kinds of resources that Solomon had when he built the first one. And so they needed this word of encouragement that God has given them up to this point. So we're going to go on with chapter 5, another short chapter. So I am going to ask Dee Dee to read verses 1 through 4 and Deanna to read 5 through 11. All right.
Then I lifted up my eyes again and looked, and behold, there was a flying scroll. And he said to me, "What do you see?" And I answered, "I see a flying scroll. Its length is 20 cubits and its width 10 cubits. Then he said to me, "This is the curse that is going forth over the face of the whole land. Surely everyone who steals will be purged away according to the writing on one side, and everyone who swears will be purged away according to the writing on the other side. I will make it go forth, declares the Lord of hosts, and it will enter the house of the thief and the house of the one who swears falsely by my name, and it will spend the night within that house and consume it with its timbers and stones.
Then the angel who was speaking with me went out and said to me, lift up now your eyes and see what this is going forth. I said, what is it? And he said, this is the ephah going forth. Again, he said, this is their appearance in all the land. And behold, a lead cover was lifted up, and this is a woman sitting inside the ephah. Then he said, this is wickedness. And he threw her down into the middle of the ephah and cast the lead weight on its opening. Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and there were two women were coming out with the wind in their wings, and they had wings like the wings of a stork. And they lifted up the ephah between the earth and the heavens. I said to the angel who was speaking with me, where are they taking the ephah? Then he said to me, to build a temple for her in the land of Shinar. And when it is prepared, she will be set there on her own pedestal.
Okay, I was really looking forward to looking into these visions. These were just so interesting. So I already gave it away. What do we start this chapter with then? How does it start? With a
Vision.
vision. Good. And so I am going to give you guys groups right now, so I don't have to say your names every time, but you do have to remember what group you're in, okay? So if you are Dee Dee, Deanna, Janelle, or Shan, you will be group 1. If you are Tracy, Pat, Sarah, or Evelyn, Sarah C, sorry, or Evelyn, you are group 2. If you are Sarah S, Laura K, let's do Stephanie, you are group 3. And if you are Fran or Cheryl, you get to be group 4. All right. You guys can handle that, right? Okay. So somebody from group 1, tell us what is in this vision, or at least start us off.
Flying scroll.
You said scroll, right? Not squirrel.
Scroll. Yeah, scroll. I slur my S's, so yes, scroll.
A flying scroll, like we would be more willing to figure a squirrel, right? Good. Okay. What else do we know about this flying scroll?
Its length is 20 cubits and its width is 10 cubits, which I'm assuming means it's pretty big.
Yeah, I had to rethink my drawing after I looked up to remember what cubits meant. Anybody look this up for us and translate cubits into inches or feet?
It's 30 feet by 15 feet.
Yes, it's 30 feet by 15 feet. So if you made this tiny little flying scroll, you need to repicture, right? That's what I wrote in my notes to myself. Whoa, I need to draw this over. It was, that's huge, 30 feet by 15 feet. Okay, cubit sounds small to me all the time, and then you remember a cubit is generally thought to be 18 inches. Their unit of measurement was what? It's like the elbow to the hand. That was kind of how they used to measure. So the average elbow to hand was apparently about 18 inches. So, okay, good. Thanks for looking that up, Evelyn. So we know the size, we know it's massive and it's flying. And what else do we know about it? Let's go on to group 2.
Says it's the curse that's going forth over the face of the whole land.
Okay, it's a curse. Do we know what the curse is? Somebody still from group 2?
Not yet.
Well, one is everyone who steals, and for everyone who swears.
Okay, can we get more specific if we go a little further about the swearing?
Yes,
Destruction. It's going to destroy or consume.
It will be. There's a verse that actually kind of gives an emphasis to what swearing means.
Oh, swear falsely by the name of the Lord.
Okay, to swear falsely by his name, which is kind of just a different thing than just swearing, right? So we have that information about people who steal and people who swear falsely by the name of the Lord. If you have a way to abbreviate that or a different term, you could think about that. And then, as Deanna started to tell us, people in group 3, could you elaborate on what the curse is going to do?
Go to, it will enter the house and stay there of the thief or the like blasphemer, and it will consume it.
Okay, what do we mean by consume? How do we know how that happens? Do we know? I guess we
No.
don't. So what do we guess?
Not gonna
Maybe?
consume.
I guess we can't say. I pictured a certain thing, but I guess we really can't say. I always think a certain thing when I see consume. What would you guys think maybe?
Fire.
Over.
Fire. Yeah, I didn't look it up. Did anybody look to see if anybody thought if it meant, I looked up a bunch of words, but I didn't look up consume here. So anyway, it will be.
It made sense with the cross references later, but
Yeah, that's
I
true.
didn't look up the word.
Yeah, that's true. So it means they're going to be destroyed though, right? Consumed completely in their houses. Okay. So for people who steal and people who swear falsely by the Lord's name. So we had, interestingly, a New Testament cross-reference for this from Ephesians 4. I think we have enough time tonight. Would Janelle, would you read that cross-reference for us? We'll give you a second to get it out. Instead of just us taking our notes, we'll read it, then we'll discuss it. That way it refreshes our minds, and anybody listening who didn't look it up will hear the passage. You got it, Janelle?
Not quite.
Okay.
Okay,
So-
Ephesians 4 and
28, 29.
verse 28.
And 28 and 29. Thanks, Fran.
Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessity, for necessary edification, that it may impart grace to the heavens and to the hearers.
Okay, so what do we find out by this verse? Let's go to our tiny little group 4. What's this have to do with us? What's it mean? What do you learn? Fran or Cheryl? Any thoughts? Cheryl, you're on mute. And she disappeared like twice.
Yeah.
Well, I have to go. I don't know. I'm on my iPhone tonight. Usually I'm on the iPad and I
Okay.
haven't mastered this. But anyway, I put if you're a thief, quit stealing instead of your hands for good.
Okay.
I mean, it was short and sweet.
And
Both,
do we
both the
go ahead,
one,
Fran.
both the one who steals and those that have that corrupting talk are to be stopped.
Okay,
Both
good.
are sin.
Good. So does this relate to the verse that we had in verses 1 through 4 to this vision?
Mhm.
Right? The same two things, thieves and people who swear or use corrupt language. And so we have the same word to us as New Testament believers. So let's put this in context of what we learned with previous word, especially to Joshua and even to Zerubbabel, and even to what we said at the beginning of chapter 1. These people are building God's temple, but what does he keep reminding them they have to do or they have to be to continue to serve him?
Obedient.
Yeah, think of the priests as well. What do they have to do and be? Somebody
Clean.
said it. Clean. They have to be clean. So in this, are we given the same instructions about being clean in the New Testament as Old Testament believers? Yeah, and if,
Yes.
yeah, and if we think back, this is the beauty of building on these studies. If you were with us for First Peter and Second Peter, we had all this connection between us being called and chosen the same way that Israel was. So those same things, we have all these parallel ideas. But so our calling is similar, but let's be clear, are we going to receive the same curse or punishment when if we were to steal, or if we were to swear falsely or use corrupt language? Are we going to get this curse that's going to destroy our homes?
No.
No. So this is where the difference stops, right? The similarity stops, right? Why are we not going to get the same punishment that they got in the Old Testament?
Because we're not bound by the Old Testament.
Okay, why are we not bound by that?
Jesus.
Jesus.
We have Jesus, right? So it isn't that the call to do these things has changed, right? Because we want to look at Paul's words about, does this mean we just go on sinning? And he says, no, may it not be so, right? We don't have grace to go on sinning. We have grace to be grateful for the grace and the forgiveness, right? So this is another way we want to look at how we have similarities to God's chosen people, and yet we have a different result when we are following Jesus. Something you might want to think about. We'll talk about it maybe right now, but what then would happen, do you think, to other nations and people that aren't following him? That's a thought.
It gives a nice, so that there, Chris, that it says, so that it will give grace to those who hear. So I think it is giving us a responsibility, not to the law, but to our neighbor, to be careful about our words for those who are not saved, who maybe have a weak faith,
Okay.
or, anyway. I think that's a nice, so that it will give grace to those who hear.
Okay, good. Yeah. And so we see the purpose in doing that. So that was our beginning of having a reference, right, to something we might not even expect to have reference to. Okay, so that was vision 1. Let's go ahead and go on and talk about vision 2, and then we'll kind of tie them all together. So what happens, let's see, I don't know what group I'm in.
1.
Group 1, is that what group I'm in? You're right, I am in group 1, and Chrissy, you probably don't know what we're doing yet, but you will be added to group 4, right? Yes, when we get back to you. So group 1, tell us how the second vision begins, or what it is.
Well, there's a measure of grain called an ephah. That's about a bushel of grain.
Okay,
And,
so let's stop for a second, because you guys looked this up. So somebody tell me what you learned when you looked up the word, because again, I want to remind you about going further in the definition than what it says, because is this a bunch of grain flying around in the air?
No.
No, what is it actually? It's in the text, but what is it?
A measure.
It's a basket, okay? It's the thing that you put the measure in, right? And if you go to that definition on Bible Hub, when you go down and you look for our specific verse, it says it's the receptacle for the measure of grain, right? So the ephah is the basket, it's the measure, it is the measure of grain. But here we want to make sure that we have the right picture, because there's a lead cover for it and there's a person in it. So it's not just a bunch of grain, it's actually the container for the grain. And if you were to look in the New King James, they actually just use basket right in the reading instead of using the word ephah. Does that make sense? So remember, when you're looking up words in the Hebrew or the Greek, don't just always take that quick definition. Go see if you can find the specific verse. You can't always, but most of the time you can. And in this one, it would have told you that it is the receptacle or the measure holding the measure of grain, okay? All right, so now, so we have this basket, and then go ahead and go on group one, I'm sorry. What do we know about the basket? Let's call it a basket, that's easier than ephah.
There's a woman sitting in it and she is called wickedness.
Okay, she's called wickedness. Like, how specifically is she called wickedness? How do we know that this is like really what she's called?
Well, her name is capitalized. It says
Her
this
name is
wickedness.
capitalized, right? So it says she's called wickedness, but this name is also capitalized. So good, I'm glad you noticed that. Okay, what else do we know? Let's go to group two. What else do we know about this vision?
It had a circular leaden covering weighing about 75 pounds.
Oh, good. I didn't look that up. That sounds pretty heavy. Lead definitely sounds heavy anyway, but that sounds heavy. And why does it matter that we know that there's a cover?
Well, it's basically trapping her in there.
Okay, so the woman gets, how does she get trapped in there? What happens?
Well, two other women, it says, coming forward with the wind in their wings. Wings like a stork, and they lift the basket between the earth and heaven. But how she got in there?
The angel threw her down.
Yes, yes, it's
With a
verse
lid.
8. Yes, there it is. There's a he, that he's the one telling. So in the vision, the angel who's telling the story does that according to verse 8. So that's an interesting picture there, right? I didn't try to get that part in my picture. And then, yeah, so as Evelyn tells us, two women come with wings like a stork. So what should we think or not think based on that description, do you think? That's a lot of things.
Well, a little bit farther in our lesson, they said that the stork was an unclean bird. So two women are also unclean along with wickedness. So
Yeah, so we see a lot of people, a lot of things with wings in these visions. So would these be different than the other category? That's what I want somebody to tell us. What are these not? Probably
not angels.
they're not angels, or they would just say they were angels, right? So yes, we learned that stork was an unclean bird. Where did our homework get that information? Anybody know? Were they right when they said that? Did they just make that up because they don't like storks? Where would there be a list of animals that are clean and unclean to the Hebrew people?
Yes, and back in Leviticus.
Leviticus, yes, Leviticus does actually, I went and looked just to make sure. Leviticus has them listed with the unclean birds. So we see these women taking the basket now, and where are they carrying the basket through or to? On their way, what are they, what's the description?
Between the earth and the heavens.
Between the earth and the heavens. So up in that level of atmosphere that scripture talks about sometimes. Interesting. And where do they go? That's the question Zechariah asks, right? This time he gets an answer, right? I didn't even think of that before. He doesn't say, don't you know, does he? He doesn't say that here. Oh, I just realized he doesn't say that to him. He must not have been expecting him to know. So where are they taking this wickedness woman?
I know.
The land of Shinar. I didn't look at the Hebrew how to say it, and I never can say it the way they say it anyway, but whichever way you would like to pronounce it, you're welcome. What else do we know about?
Temple for her.
Yes.
And set her up on her own pedestal.
Good. Okay. So not just that she's going to a certain country, but that there's a temple and there's a pedestal. Interesting contrast that it didn't occur to me until I was preparing the lesson. So this woman named Wickedness